Hello everyone, welcome to this brand new series where you will learn how to develop Spring Boot applications from building web apps to creating powerful microservices. My name is Kishore, and in this first video we are diving into the basics. We will explore what Spring Boot is, why it's a game changer for Spring based applications, and the key configurations you need to know. We will cover how to create project, switching default to other servers, overriding application properties, importing legacy XML configurations, then creating a REST endpoint. At the end, we will package and deploy the application to an external server. So first of all, what is Spring Boot? Spring Boot is an open source framework designed to make it easier and faster to develop web and microservice applications using Java and Spring Framework. It takes care of a lot of tedious configurations, which is going to streamline the development process. Spring Boot automatically configures your application based on the libraries you include in your class path. Example, if you have Spring Boot Starter Web in your project, this starter sets up everything you need to develop web applications. It configures an embedded server for you, then a front controller so that you can focus more on your business logic and less on the environment setup. Then, if you have Spring Boot Starter Data JPA in the class path, then you will get automatic CRUD operation methods so that you don't have to manually implement these methods or you don't have to write queries to handle the database operations. Then it also takes care of handling the database connections and also closing the resources. So it does all the heavy lifting tasks for you so that you can directly access these operations without implementing. If you have this Spring Boot Starter activator in your class path, it takes care of providing the endpoints so that you can easily monitor your application's health and metrics. Similarly, if you use this Spring Cloud for microservices, it is going to simplify the development of microservices by managing all the necessary configurations required for your applications to run on the cloud. It provides tools and solutions to handle common challenges in microservice architecture like service discovery, load balancing, centralized configuration, and fault tolerance. So you can focus on building your services rather than managing infrastructure. Coming to the prerequisites, you need to have minimum JDK 17 because Spring Boot 3 needs JDK 17 or later version of JDK. It's always recommended to use LTS version. Currently, JDK 21 is the LTS version, and the next LTS version that is available will be JDK 25, which is still not released, but it's good if you use just JDK 21. Then coming to the IDE, you can use Eclipse or STS or IntelliJ or VS Code. I'm using Eclipse IDE. Then you should have a good idea on Java and Spring Framework. Okay, so let's first create the project. For that, just go to this website called start.spring.io, or else if you are using Google, just type Spring Initializer, and the very first link is Spring Initializer website. Click on it. What it provides is it is going to provide you a project template. You can choose the project template. I am choosing Maven, and which language you are using, that is Java, and there are different Spring Boot version available. What you have to do is you have to choose the one which is stable. It could be 3.4 or 3.3. Other things try to avoid, like snapshot or M1 means milestone, because they are just for testing purpose. They have released, and the changes will be done, and it will be released as a stable release just like 3.4 or 3.3. So I will choose the 3.4.2, And here, this is a Maven related project. It will ask you to enter the group ID and artifact ID, and then you can actually enter the package name you want. You can also change the Java version as per the Java installed in your machine. So coming to the group ID, I will give com.examples only, and artifact ID, we will give the project name as simple Spring Boot app. Then we will change the package name to be com.example. As I am using JDK 21, I am using this Java 21 version. Right now we are going to add a few dependencies. Let me click on add dependencies and type web and select this Spring Web, which allows you to build a web including RESTful applications using Spring MVC and uses Apache Tomcat as the default web container. Then you can add dev tools, that is Spring Boot dev tools. What it does is it automatically restarts your application at the time of developing when you make any changes in the code. So let us click on generate, which is going to download a zip file of this project, and from Eclipse you need to open the project and locate where exactly it is downloaded. This is the location. You don't have to unzip it. From Eclipse itself you can unzip it. So what you have to do is you just go to file and select open project from file system and go to archive because it is a zip file, and select the zip file and click on open. The two checkboxes in that one checkbox you can uncheck the first one, and the second checkbox that has Maven at the right side you can select it. Then you can click finish. You just need to wait for the download to complete, and then when you expand the project, you can observe the project structure. You will see src folder with main/java that will have one Java file with a main method. This is the Java class. It has an annotation called at the rate Spring Boot application, and it has a main method. And what exactly it does is this is the one which is going to do the auto configuration based on the library you add in your project. So if you add a web library, this annotation starts automatically configuring the application to work in web environment. And if it has a JPA library, it is going to look for the JPA library in the class path and tries to look for application.properties file for database credentials and starts establishing the database connection. So this is just like your entire application starting point. You need to load this class. That is why the main method is having the statement called spring application.run. You can run this application. Automatically the Tomcat server starts. You can just choose Java application and click OK. And in the console, you should be able to see this banner that is telling that Spring Boot application started. And if you scroll towards right side, you should see Tomcat started on port 8080. And it is an application that has no code. It has just a main method. If you want to change the port number, what you can do is you can go to this resource folder and expand. You will see application.properties file. This file by default will have some property like application name. You can remove it or you can keep it, not a problem. You can comment always using this hash symbol. So I want to mention the server port means the Spring Boot has its own inbuilt properties for Spring Boot. One of the property for server port changing is server.port equals to the value you need to give. So port value. And I am going to use here server.port and look at the Eclipse. This is because there is one plugin called STS plugin added in Eclipse. Because of that, it will show all the Spring Boot inbuilt properties. You need to select that. In case it is not showing, you type it, and let me change that port to 9090. Now what happens? Your Spring Boot application runs in 9090 port number. That is your embedded Tomcat server. If you save this, automatically your Spring Boot application restarts because of that dev tools. And if you look at what is the message coming, you can see Tomcat started in 9090. If you want to start the application again, what happens? Let's see. Look at the message. What it is telling is application failed to start, web server failed to start, port 9090 was already in use. So how to get rid of this error is you need to understand the server is still running. If you go here and click on this drop down, you will see one message with the terminated and another is running. You select this, and if you want to stop the application, you can just click on this red button. That is going to stop your application, but you have to rerun it again. So if you are using dev tools in your project, you don't have to restart your application. You just need to save it. Automatically it restarts. And if you want to rerun it, you have to stop and you have to rerun. Let us understand the other configurations. Like now there is a Tomcat server. Suppose I want to add a different server. Then what I should do is you need to go to pom.xml file and then look at the library the pom.xml has. There is a web library and there is a dev dependency, that is dev tools, and there is a test library. But in Spring Boot Starter web library, there is an inclusion, that is a Tomcat server inclusion, that is an embedded Tomcat server. You need to exclude it. How do you exclude? You have to write here exclusions, and inside the exclusions you need to write exclusion tag, and inside that you should write the group ID and artifact ID of your Tomcat server. And what is the group ID and artifact ID? You just go to Maven repository now. So Maven repository and search for Spring Boot Starter Tomcat. When you search for Spring Boot Starter Tomcat, you get a Spring Boot Starter Tomcat artifact. Select that. You can choose any version, it doesn't matter. And this is the dependency of Spring Boot Starter Tomcat, which is part of your Spring Boot Starter web. You just need to exclude by mentioning the group ID and artifact ID. So you don't have to copy the entire thing. You have to just copy the group ID and artifact ID and go to this exclusion tag and there you paste it. That's it. Just save it. Now what happened is the Tomcat server is excluded, but you need to include the Jetty server. For that, you go to Maven repository and type Jetty server, like Spring Boot Starter Jetty, and you will get Spring Boot Starter Jetty. You select this artifact. You can choose any version, it doesn't matter. The reason is we are going to copy the dependency, but we are going to remove this version tag when we paste. So you copy the dependency and then what you do is you remove the version of this Jetty. Why you have to remove is Spring Boot will automatically take care of recognizing the right version of Spring Boot Starter Jetty, because the parent version which we selected in the Spring Initializer is 3.4.2. As per this release number, what is the compatible Jetty server version, Spring Boot will automatically recognize. So this is the advantage of using Spring Boot. Now the Jetty server is added. You just stop the application. When you want to see the changes of server, you have to rerun it again. So when you rerun the program, you should see at the end, instead of Tomcat server, it is telling Jetty server started and it is running in 9090 port number. This Jetty server you can change to undertow server as well, because Spring Boot supports three servers, Tomcat, Jetty, and one more is undertow from JBoss. Let me add undertow server. So I will use Spring Boot starter undertow. You have to follow the same steps. Go to the artifact. You can choose any version you want. You just need to copy the dependency, but while pasting, ensure that you are removing the version number, but you also should remove the Jetty server dependency. First, you can remove the Jetty server dependency and then you paste the undertow server, but you have to remove this version. So please remove this and save. Then stop the server and rerun it again. And you should able to see the JBoss related logs. Look here, JBoss threads version and undertow started. This way you can actually change the server. If you want to get back to the default Tomcat server, you just need to remove the dependency of undertow, or if in case you have Jetty server, remove it. And you need to remove that exclusions tag also, which is inside the Spring Boot Starter web library. And now you get back the Tomcat server. Just you need to stop and restart the application so that you will get back the Tomcat server. And notice Tomcat started in this port number. Next thing, what we will do is we will actually try to package this application and try to run this application using the Java command, so that the production environment people can directly run this application without having any external servers. So to package, you just need to use Maven option, right click, go to the run as option. There you will see Maven build, select that Maven build, and in place of goals, you just type package without any typing mistake and click on run and wait for that build success message. So you can observe there is a build success. If you observe this console, there is a terminated option, that is Maven, and another is the application which is still running. It is running in 9090. If you run the application through Java command, then that Java application also runs in 9090. So what you have to do is you need to stop this application running in Eclipse first. And then in the target folder, you should be able to see the jar file. In case you are not able to see the jar file, just go to the project and right click, then click on refresh. You should be able to see the target folder having this jar file called Spring Boot App Snapshot.jar. Just go to that location to run the application through Java command. So you just need to show in System Explorer, then open the command prompt here and type java dash jar. Make sure that you are in the target folder, or else just type dir first, so that you should be able to see this jar file. Now you can type java dash jar spring boot, that is simple spring boot app.jar, and if I hit enter key, it should start the application. You can see this spring banner and Tomcat is starting in 9090. So your application is running in 9090. But what if the application has already taken 9090 in your machine? Like Eclipse was already taking that 9090 and you want to change it. That is where you would actually override the application properties. I don't want this 9090 to be taken from application properties. I want it to be overridden. How to do that? I can just use Control C to come out of that terminal, and then this time what you do is use the same command, but you give this option called server port equals 9092, and the dash dash is like a command line argument you are giving. The main method is going to take this port number. This is what the property you wrote in application.properties. Now it will be overridden from 90902 to 9092. Now let me run this program and see, will this Spring application runs in 9092? Yes, it is running in 9092. You can see this. So let me stop this now, and Control C will stop, and that is how you actually create the packaging of your application. So the next thing is we will try to create a component and use it in the main method. Look at the statement spring application.run, and what is the return type of run method is configurable application context, which is actually extending application context. See, if I use Control Shift T, configurable application context, and that is extending application context. It means I can use here application context. So, application context of org.springframework.context and take that from this particular statement. So you can use this to access the objects present in the Spring container because Spring container manages all the objects present in the Spring container, correct? Now, let me create one class in the same package com.example. The class name, I will give it as something called user service and I will click on finish. And what I will do is I will just write this one as at the rate component. And let me create one message here, public string greet message, and let it return this is user service. And if I want to use this object, remember whenever there is an annotation at the rate component either in Spring Framework or Spring Boot, this object you don't have to create, Spring will create it and it is going to maintain it in the Spring container. And what would be the bean ID? Every object created in the Spring container will have a bean ID. By default, the bean ID would be the class name, but the first letter will be in lowercase. So if I want to access that bean object with the bean ID, then I need a reference to that container. That is what the reference I have created here, that is through application context. Next, if I want to access that, I can use user service, then context dot get bean method I can use where I would mention the bean ID. The bean ID is going to be the user service, which is the name of the class. But as I told, it has to be started with the lowercase. But the get bean method of application context returns what? It actually returns object. So what you have to do, you have to convert that to the lower type, that is user service, because user service also extends object. So you have to write user service and then you get an user service type. And now we can access the methods present in user service. The greet is the method and we will print it in the system.out.println so that we are able to see that message. Let me remove this. And now if I rerun the program because it is stopped and you should be able to see this is user service. Next, let us see how to auto wire the object to another object. Suppose user service depends on one object, let's say a DAO object, and how to actually auto wire it. For that, we will first create one class user DAO. And remember, I'm not explaining JPA here. I'm just explaining the core functionality of Spring Framework. And I will write one annotation. I can write any annotation here, either service or repository or even component also. That also works. So I will use component annotation itself, but you can use at the rate service or at the rate configuration or at the rate repository. Anything will work that will make your Spring to create the object of that class. And let's say I have here one method like public string get method and that returns user data based on the ID. Let me pass a parameter user data for this ID. Now we will try to auto-wire it because this user DAO object will be created in the container and even user service object also will be created in the container and we can auto-wire it by using private user DAO. Then on top of this, you just write auto-wired. Then the user DAO will be auto-wired and the DAO variable you can use to call the methods because the object is injected, correct? And what we will do, this is user service, and what we will do here is we will write DAO dot get method by passing some number like 20. And if in case Spring Boot has failed to autowire, then I should get null pointer exception. But what I'm getting is this is user service, user data for 20 is printing because we are invoking the greet method from the main, correct? That is the reason here. And the greet method invokes the get method of 20. In case you have forgotten to write autowired, you will get an exception called null pointer exception. Or if the auto wiring is done, but let me wait for the application to restart because of exception, we have to restart. Let me rerun this Spring Boot application. I am getting this message without any problem, but you have forgotten to write the annotation like at the rate component. Then what happens is AutoWire will fail. You can observe here it is telling failed field DAO in user service required a bean of user DAO that could not be found. Application failed to start because this object is nowhere created in the container. Either you write at the rate component or you can write at the rate service or at the rate configuration, it will work. Let me write at the rate repository and user DAO as at the rate repository. Let me rerun the program and let's see will it work. Yes, it's working. Let me again comment it so that I can rerun it and because I will get an error to show you. So now the object is not there. Let me now write another annotation at the rate service. So if I use at the rate service and let me stop and rerun, it's already working, but let me rerun it once. You could see the output. It means if you annotate a class with at the rate service or at the rate repository or at the rate component, the Spring container will always create the object. But why we have these many annotations? The reason is simple to categorize different layers so that you will have separate classes of DAO, separate classes of service, separate classes of utility classes, and the type of logics you write would be different. And sometimes you want to perform some operation only on a particular layer, like only DAO layer. Then you can write some interceptor program and then you can only select the at the rate repository classes, correct? Or you can only select at the rate service related classes. But if you write at the rate component everywhere, then all the classes will be selected. I don't want like that. Such kind of categories are very much important in the development. Next, can I create the object and make Spring to create its entry in the container so that I can auto-wire. What I'm saying is I don't want user DAO object to be created by Spring container. Just for understanding purpose, let me stop this. I want to create the user DAO object, but I should be able to register in the Spring container so that the auto wiring should work. The auto wiring will work only if the object is available in the container. So that is possible. For that, there is a separate annotation you should use called at the rate bean, but you need to write it in the class that is already auto scanned, that is at the rate Spring Boot application or inside the component annotation like user service. Here also you can write that at the rate bean annotation. So let me write that at the rate bean annotation inside this class that is like this at the rate bean. Then any method have this annotation is automatically executed and its object returned will be registered in the Spring container. So let me write public user DAO, then let me simply print one message to know that this method is automatically called and I will return new user DAO. I am creating the object, but because of at the rate bean, the object returned by this return statement will be registered in the Spring container so that anyone can actually auto-wire. So let me rerun the program and see what happens. Look at the delimiter which is printing and we are still able to get the message from the get method because this object is available in the Spring container. In case I comment this, again you will get an error. So this is another way of registering the object. Next, we will try to read the properties present in the application.property file. We have one property called server.port. Let me write custom property like message.text and some custom message like this is a message from property file. How to read these messages means we should create a class and that should have a variable with some annotation like at the rate value, and through that at the rate value we can inject these property. And I will be creating one message class now. Let me create a message class. And whenever these classes read application properties, they are reading configurations. So you can use an annotation called configuration annotation, but it works even if you use at the rate component, at the rate service as well. And I want to supply the value of application.properties. So what you should do is you should write here an annotation like this, the property name on top of the variable. So let me create one variable called string server port number, and I will use the annotation called at the rate value, import it, and then server.port. And I will also create another variable called text variable. Let me name it as text message, and I will use this value annotation to inject what is the property name. Let me copy that property name called message.txt to avoid the typo. Then we will paste here. If I want to access these properties, I need the getters. Let me generate the getters and select getters and click generate. As this message is having at the rate configuration, this object will be created in the Spring container. Let me auto wire it. Maybe in the user service I can do that. I will write here at the rate auto wired, then private message, and I will call the getter method here. Message equals message dot get text message, and then I will also enter port equals, let me break this to multiple lines, message dot get port number. And if I see the output, it is rerunning. You can see the message from the property file and the port number. This way you can read the application properties. You might think, why do we need to do that? Probably some of the properties would be useful uh, for the code. That data, if you want to read, then this method is going to be really helpful. Next, we will try to read the XML bean configurations to support legacy based projects. Usually in XML also you can have the bean configurations so that these objects you can configure it in the XML. So what I will do, I will create one XML file. You have to create it in the resources folder. Let me keep, let me search for XML, and we will give a name called beans.xml and click on finish. And remember, we should have the namespace in the XML file, and that should be Spring context namespace. What you can do is you can go to internet and type Spring context schema, and it opens the official documentation. Just search like this, Control F, and type Spring context and look for Spring context, and you can see the context schema. You can just copy these beans, then you can write one bean tag with an ID and the class name. And I want the user DAO object to be configured. Then what I will do, I will be writing here one ID, like I would write it as a DAO2, and the class name. What is the class fully qualified name? That is com.example.userdao. Let me write that. That's it. So you can actually now get the bean whose ID is GAO2. But already there is a at the rate bean annotation which is doing the job. If I do like this, You do not see which is working, whether this bean is working or at the red bean is working. What I will do, I will simply remove that. Okay, now I will definitely get an error and I will stop this. So this user service, which is auto wiring the DAO, is actually now not working. So now the beans.xml, I wrote the bean tag. Let me rerun this. We are still getting the error because Spring Boot doesn't know this XML as the bean configurations. We need to make the Spring Boot to automatically detect this. For that, in one of the component class, we need to import this XML. Let me use message class, which is actually one of the component class, as it is automatically detected. What is the annotation we should use is, we should use the annotation called import resource, and there you can mention any number of XML file you want. Let me write beans.xml, and now look at the program which is rerunning and it is able to get the user data. Let us change this beans.xml. Probably we want to see the changes after creating a new class. Will it work? Let's see. Let me create a new class and we will name this one as profile DAO, and we will have one public string get name, and we will return some name here. Tester is the name. Now we are not creating at the right component. So what we will do, we will configure this class in the XML file using the same bean tag we have used for user DAO. And we will write DAO3 as an ID, and here I will give the name called profile DAO. And if Spring has created the object of this profile DAO in the Spring container, obviously I should be able to auto-wire this. Let me auto-wire in the user DAO by using private profile DAO, and I will write here at the rate Autowired, and the get method only let it call. So calls profile DAO. What is the method name? The method name is get name. So I will write profile DAO dot get name. If it has successfully injected the profile DAO object to the user DAO, it means profile DAO is successfully created as well. And I should not get any error message. I should get the name. If I save, I should be able to see the name, that is tester. You can see calls profile DAO equals to tester. So this way you can actually add the old style of XML bean configuration and import it in the Spring Boot as well. Next, what we will try to do is we will try to send this data outside the application so that other applications can use this data. To do that, we should create RESTful web service. So RESTful web service helps an application to share the data across heterogeneous applications, like a Java application can share the data to .NET application, it can share the data to Python application, it can share the data to JavaScript application, because the applications can be written in any language. So RESTful helps to do that. To create a RESTful web service, what we should do is we should create a class with an annotation called REST controller. Let me create a new class and name it as REST API. And to create a web service, we should use this annotation called REST controller that helps this class to take the incoming request and send the response data in a format which any applications can understand. But right now we are just going to send the text data. In order to allow the users or the clients to access the application, we need to give some URL. Through request mapping, we will tell what is the main URL they should use, that is going to be API. And we have some HTTP mapping methods like get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, and delete mapping. Through that, the users can send different HTTP requests. We will try to create one variable with the type called profile user service, that is user service, and we will auto wire. So what happens now is the user service object will be injected to the variable user service so that you can access the method of user service. And I will create one method called greet method that returns string, which has to return the greet method from service. And the request should hit this method and get the data whatever the greet method is returning. If the request should be sent to the greet method, then we should do an HTTP mapping. Let us use get mapping. Now the clients can use HTTP GET request and the URL should be the main URL, that is slash API, but still I can use the sub path as well. But for this exercise, we will just use the main path, that is slash API. And if the end user sends the request, they would see the message in their application. Now the end user is not any application. We will just use the browser to send the GET request. Let me rerun this program as I have stopped this. And what is going to be the URL the end user should use is the URL is going to be slash API, before that localhost colon 8080. Let me open the browser and type http colon localhost colon 8080 slash API. I guess it is 9090. We should use 9090. So it is 9090 slash API. Look at the message actually coming here. This is user service, user data for 20, calls profile DAO. Everything is working fine. This data is going outside the application. And if it is a mobile application, it will be displayed on mobile screen. If it is a web application, it will be displayed on web browser. And if it is a console based application like ATM monitor or swiping machine kind of programs which is going to send the request to the bank service, they will get the data and the transaction successful, transaction decline messages and all it will show. It means they are able to communicate across multiple bank applications written in different languages. So that is possible because of the REST API. That is what we implemented. One last thing what we should do is we need to deploy this application in an external server. To do that, we need to build this application as var, but this application is built as jar. If you try to package, it is going to be built as jar, correct? What we must have done was, while creating the project itself, we should have selected var, but the project is already selected with jar option and it has already some code. So how to convert this to var means you just need to create some changes here. When you select var, certain things change in the src folder. That is, one extra file called servlet initializer will be created. You just need to create this file. That is one thing. And secondly, in the pom.xml, there will be one option called packaging. That should be var. So let us make these two changes. So for that, what I will do, I will create servlet initializer Java file and copy this code. Let me do that first. And remember, all the class you create should be at least inside the com.example. Even servlet initializer also should be inside the com.example. Now you might ask why. The reason is at the rate Spring Boot application, where is it? It is in the main class. This is going to start scanning all the classes from the package it begins. So whenever you are creating any component based classes, it has to be inside the com.example. But is it possible that at the rate Spring Boot application can scan the classes outside the com.example? Yes. For that, there is one annotation called at the rate component scan you should use. And there you should use the base package and you need to mention it has to scan from which particular package. And from com package onwards, it starts scanning. If in case that annotation is not there, from where the at the rate Spring Boot application class is beginning, from there you should create all your classes. Now this servlet initializer is inside comrade example, and the another change what you should do is you should change that packaging in pom.xml. The packaging part is not present anywhere, but notice where is that packaging mentioned. If you go to pom.xml, packaging is mentioned after the artifact ID and version number. You can mention this packaging anywhere inside the project tag, not a problem, but make sure that it is the child tag of project. So let me use this packaging bar and add it in the project tag. That's it. Now we will stop this and we will rebuild this project by right clicking and going on to run as, then selecting map and build, and we will select this package as the goals, means just type it package as the goals and click on run. Let me check why that error. um, Build failure, but before that could not open resource. Okay, instead of like this, what we will do is we will give class path colon beans.xml so that it can recognize the beans.xml in the resource folder. As it was a console based jar application, it was not having any issue, but for var you give class path colon, even for jar also it works. Now let's again rebuild it by using the same option and package. Yeah, you are getting build success. We will refresh this project so that we will get the var. And what we have to do is we have to deploy this in the external server. We have to copy this in the external server. So there is a war file here. You have to deploy this war file in the server. Firstly, we need to download the server. Let me quickly download Tomcat server. I will type Tomcat server download, and you need to select the downloads folder, Tomcat 10, and if you scroll down, you will see zip file. You don't have to install, you can just download the zip and start the server. I will download the 64-bit Windows zip. Let it download. We will unzip this. So after the extraction, you should see this folder and just get inside. There is a bin folder you can observe where it provides you some files to start the server and stop the server, like startup batch file, and you can use startup shell script in Linux machine. Then there's a shutdown batch file and shutdown shell script. You can just go and open these files through the command prompt like this, cmd, and just type startup.bat. It is going to start the server. Let the server be running. The next thing what you should do is you need to locate another folder, that is web apps folder of your Apache Tomcat, and this is the place where you are going to deploy that war file which is generated. You just go to Eclipse and open the target folder, copy the war file and paste inside the web apps folder of the Tomcat. Just paste it and just wait for few seconds. Look at this folder. Simple Spring Boot app tells that the application has been deployed successfully. You need to use the name of this folder, which is the application context path, but this time the port number is not 9090, it is 8080 because it is in an external server. So you have to just type http colon localhost 8080 slash the folder name, that is the application context path slash API, and I should be able to see the message which I was seeing even before deploying it in the external server. It means you could able to deploy your Spring Boot application in the external server also.